Today we're going to be talking about graphing sine and cosine functions again, but today we're going to talk about ones that have a phase, amplitude, and vertical shift changes. So remember that the period tells us how often the pattern repeats. We find that by taking 2 pi and dividing it by b. The amplitude tells us how far from the midline the graph goes up or down. So that's going to be a. And then the vertical shift is going to change the midline. Okay, and remember our key points for the basic functions. For sine, we go 0, up, 0, down, 0. And for cosine, we go up, 0, down, 0, up. Okay. So we're going to look at a few different graphs here. So the first one we have is f of x equals 2 sine theta plus 2. So for this, we have to recognize what function it is, so we know what our pattern is, and then we need to find the amplitude, the period, intervals, and then we also are going to need to know what its change is for things as well. So this plus 2 is the only thing that's different about what we got going on. So let's find everything else first. The amplitude is still the absolute value of a, so that's 2. The period is still 2 pi divided by b. Remember, b is 1 there. So 2 pi. That means by the time we make it over to 2 pi, we should have one sine curve. Our intervals then are 2 pi divided by 4, which would be pi over 2. So every pi over 2, we're going to have something marked. Here, remember, for intervals, you just take period, whatever you got here, and divide it by 4. All right, so that means that we're going to have something marked at 0, pi over 2, pi, 3 pi over 2, and 2 pi, okay? Now, that plus 2 means that we're going to move this graph up 2 spaces. So we're going to, instead of having our midline be the x-axis, our midline has now moved up 2 spaces. So I'm going to dash in this line at positive 2 because that's now my new 0. Okay, so we are starting for sine. We start at 0. And then at our next interval, we're going to be up to our amplitude, and our amplitude is 2. So we're going 2 above the new midline. And then at the next interval, we're back at 0. The next interval, we're down to the negative amplitude, and the next interval, we're back up to 0, okay? So then we're going to connect the dots like so. Now, there is another way to do this instead of moving the midline. I think this is the easiest version. The other way to do it is to plot all the points originally and then move all of them up 2 spaces at the end. That gives you lots of dots on your graph. It's kind of up to you what you're thinking for things. Okay, so let's try another one. So here we have f of x equals the cosine of 3 theta minus 2. So again, regardless of what function it is, we still need to find the amplitude, period, intervals, and then what change happens to it. So our amplitude is 1. Our period is going to be 2 pi divided by 3 because our b is 3. Intervals, we're going to take 2 pi divided by 3 and we're going to divide it by 4, so that means we're going to multiply by 1/4. So we get 2 pi over 12, but we're going to simplify that to be pi over 6. So remember, each of these tick marks is a pi over 6. So we're going to have something marked at every single one of these. And we know it's pi over 6 for every single one since there's 6 tick marks by the time we make it to pi. All right, this minus 2 means that we're going to move down 2. So our midline, instead of being at 0, is now going to move down here to negative 2. All right, cosine starts at the amplitude. So instead of starting at our midline, we're going to start up 1 space above that. And remember, we said we're marking something every tick mark. So then we're at 0, down, 0, up. By the time we made it to 2 pi over 3, we're done with one cosine curve. And we keep going down to 0, down, 0, up, 0, down, 0, up. By the time we made it to 2 pi, we've made 3 cosine curves. And again, they should have some curve to them. They shouldn't, be just zigzags there. Okay, and so then that is our graph for that one. Let's look at one more here. And I'm actually going to change this one to be a negative. So we have f of x equals negative sine of 2 theta minus 1. So our amplitude is going to be positive 1. That negative 1 that is there tells us that we are going to flip our graph. So remember, our pattern will just flip, and we'll talk about that again in just a second. Our period is going to be 2 pi divided by 2, so that means that pi is the period. That means by the time we make it here, we should be done with 1, and by the time we're here, we should be done with 2 sine curves because of this 2 there. Our intervals are going to be pi divided by 4, so that means that we're going to mark something every 1.5 spaces here. And then that minus 1 tells us that we're moving our midline down 1 space. So here, this negative 1 is now our new 0. All right, so sine starts at 0 or starts at 1? So sine starts at 0, regardless of the fact that we're flipping this pattern. All right, so now that we know that we're flipping it, we are going to, instead of going 0 up, 0 down, 0, we're going to go 0 down to our amplitude, and then to 0, up, 0, down, 0, up, 0. By the time we made it to 2 pi, we finished 2 sine curves here. Okay, and that's what this looks like. So the only difference from what we did yesterday and what we did today is that some of these questions, if not all of them, will have some sort of number afterwards being added or subtracted, and all that means is that you're going to move it up, your midline up or down that number of spaces before you start the pattern. That's it.